Okay, welcome to talk about risk in pharmacoepidemiology. So when we're talking about risk, there's really a couple of things that we should know. In pharmacoepidemiology, the primary measure of association is risk. The first one being absolute risk. So what is the absolute risk for a population when it's exposed to a particular risk factor or a couple of risk factors? Absolute risk is measured both in terms of incidence as well as prevalence. Incidence is the number of new cases of a disease in a population when compared to the rest of the population, whereas prevalence is already existing cases in the population. So let's say we're looking at dengue fever in this population in the year 2015. Prevalence would include incidence, so it would include the new cases plus the already old cases between this particular time period, so at a point in time. Prevalence can be of two kinds. We can have point prevalence, which is at this particular point in time. So as of today, this day, how many cases do we have of dengue fever, for example? And we can have a period prevalence. So we can have between January to November 2015, how many cases of dengue fever were found in this particular population. So depending on what it is that you're trying to express, you could either go for a point prevalence or a period prevalence. Keep in mind that prevalence does include incidence, but not the other way around. So incidence is simply new cases in the population. In terms of clinical use, incidence is most relevant because it's the number of new cases divided by number of individuals at risk for developing the disease. So in clinical terms, we are very concerned in terms of looking at who is at risk for developing the disease and then how many of those actually go ahead and get the disease or end up developing the disease. Again, if you're looking at infectious diseases from that standpoint as well as from non-communicable diseases, incidence makes the most sense clinically. So let's take an example. Let's say in 2010, 4 people out of 100 were infected by an incurable viral disease. 16 ended up having the disease, okay? So when we want to calculate incidence, we already have 4 new cases. So we have our numerator. For the denominator, we want to find out how many individuals were at risk. So since we know that it's an incurable viral disease, technically all 100 were at risk. But since 16 were already infected and had the disease, we're going to subtract the 16 from these 100 to bring our denominator to 84. So that's how we would calculate our incidence. Our prevalence would simply become the infected cases over 100. So this kind of gives you an idea of how to calculate incidence and prevalence.